Right, hello campers. What have we got to do today? Well, we're going to do something a little bit different, as always, because I love to keep you all on your toes. We're going to be mixing acrylics in with oils through layering in a very clever way. However, if you want to go off on a tangent, you can do acrylics in multiple layers. I'll show you how, don't worry about it. Now for our inspiration, going for this gorgeous photograph of Anglesey Abby, which a few of you I know go to, because everyone tells me about it and how beautiful it is. Obviously it is a place to go and it looks absolutely stunning. I went for the snowdrops because it's springtime and the snowdrops are out at the moment. I thought it would be a nice little token gesture for the time of year. And it's interesting because we've got some tree branches here. Rather than being covered with leaves, they're bare and we can see through to the house. So I thought it'd be quite a nice picture. Now, because of all the layering and the different painting technique we're going to be doing on top of each other, I've got a piece of paper. It's just an old piece that I've primed up with a few layers of gesso or gesso, depending on how posh you want to be. I've just stuck my pencil down here, checked out my aspect ratio because it's more of a panoramic picture. Now I know you've all got different pictures, so obviously check out your picture, make sure your aspect ratio is correct before you get started. Otherwise you could distort the image. We're going to start off real easy. I've got a charcoal pencil here and I am just looking at sketching in the bare bones. So I'm going to get that basic grass, which, sorry, my top is scratching the desk, making a load of racket, of the grassland that's sloping down because it's a nice setting. The left is slightly lower than the right, so if you're doing this picture, check that you have a slight angle. Then I'm going to whack in the building. Now if I look at this drop here, so from this point to this point, I can see it's just slightly longer than I have for the grass, so I know it's going to be left hand side here. Then for the overall building length, just shy of this length, so my building should be along here. Now I could measure up as well, so if I wanted to do that at the highest point, and I'm not going to chimney, I'm going to the roof, then if I measure that, it's just shy of the overall length that I can see. So it means that should be roughly my roof line. Okay, now that I've got that in, I need to just quickly snap down the basic structure. So I'm going to section this off. I'm going to put in a section down here for my snowdrops. Woohoo! It's a little bit wonky, which is good because they are going up and down. Then I'm going to look at, I've got my grass and my trees that are coming around here. Okay, so I'm just patchworking that in. That actually comes up to the top because I can see that triangular format. And I've got another bit that kind of comes in here. I'm holding my pencil towards the end and loosely just snagging these in, creating up some basic perimeters. There's a nice hedge there. I'm just sneaking in and throwing in the odd bit of tree detail. Now I'm not going to worry about these branch details, don't worry too much about them. If you've got them down, brilliant, but if you haven't, don't worry about it. The main important structure within this picture at this stage is going to be the building. So let's start whacking that in. Now the easiest way is to get your roof, top and bottom, then to set up some basic horizontal lines to set the size of the windows that you've got to throw in there, as I'm doing here. Okay, then you've got to go for your vertical lines because it's quite griddy. Can you see that grid formation? Right, I'm gonna throw in some verticals to set up this window, that window, and then I've got the window that's slightly smaller here. Then I've got another bow window around here. And then I've got the side of the door frame. That's going to be the other side, and that means I get my door in here, and I've got my window snacking over here, and obviously some windows up here. So it's a very kind of six-pack, shall we say, set up. You have got a slight angle tilt on the roof. It might be wise to get that in now, just to check that you've got enough room to play around with everything. Then I'm going to draft these all in. Okay, you should end up, hopefully, with something kind of like this. Now I'm just going to put in a hedge, like so. Hedge over here. I got my tree coming up over here. Bit of a wonky tree. Really coming round. So, and then there's a few different, there's like a hedge sitting in here. That comes up, and I'm looking at that, that's in line roughly with my windows. Gives you good basic drawing skills, and this should be kind of just slightly high. Like so. And then I'm going to have my flowers down here. That's the side. I need my bushes to swish around up here and just kind of flare across the front of that window. I reckon actually there's two bushes. That looks like it sits slightly lower than that one. So we'll bring that up, and then you've got bits of a tree coming in, just putting in some basic locations so that I can tone things correctly. Will make life a lot easier. And that comes up and then down there. I can actually see a little bit of the roof peeking through. Slightly more. And then let's crisp up. And we've got our snowdrops just coming down here. Now you can see that my hand's sitting on it, it smeared it. It doesn't really matter because where we're going it's going to get a lot more smeared. But what you need to do once you've kind of got to this stage, you need to get your charcoal pencil, hold your hand right close down to the nib and give yourself a really strong linear drawing that's quite crisp. Right, so you should have something like this. Then you're going to get a bit of kitchen roll or a rag, and you're going to give it a good rub down. Okay, so it looks like that. Now we get onto the really hard work. Well, it's not so hard. We're just going to lay down some perimeter colours for each key component. I've got my Stay Wet palette here ready to go, as you can see, and I'm just going to pour out my colours now. We're going to need some white, and we're going to be working in the acrylics for a good reason. So with the acrylics, they're drying quite fast. We want this first layer to be dry before we put the second layer on. Specifically, if we're going to do acrylic oils, it must always be dry. Now normally you would do this in oils using a solvent, because the solvent mixed in with an oil will dry out fairly fast. Okay, but this is a different way of doing it. It's much more easier and health conscious from an artist's point of view. So I would recommend doing it if you like to lay down a basic colour for all your different sections. So for my colours, I've got white, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, cadmium red, crimson red, then cadmium yellow, lemon yellow and a bit of black. I'm going to use a fairly big soft head brush, as you can see here, and I need a pot of clean water, which I'm just going to go and grab now. So I've got my pot of clean water, I've got a brush, which is a decent sized brush. What we're going to do is lay down very soft waterized tonal shades for each component section, and I would recommend working from the top down because the paint's going to be a bit wet, and then that way you don't lean in it. I'm going to turn my palette that way around because that obviously makes sense if I'm working down. So to start off with, let's deal with the sky, and we're going to keep it real simple. I'm taking some cobalt blue and I'm going to add some white to make it very soft pale blue. The idea of the acrylics is that you need to water this down so it's quite runny and translucent when you apply it to the surface. Should be quite an inky. You're aiming for an inky consistency. You can see here I'm adding water to it. It's not the greatest because my palette's at an angle, so everything's going to run into it. I'm just tilting that. Then I'm going to put that on my paper. Now it's still a little bit really too thick, the paint, so I take a little bit of water, just ease that out into my background shade. Don't worry if you get a little bit of cross-contamination from the charcoal. That's the whole point of this first layer, is to take any contamination and lock it into a painted layer. Like so. Right, then I'm going to get some of the green down here. Now since I've got the blue, what I can do is I can add a little bit of the cadmium yellow into the blue and make a minty green. So you can play around. You can put any green you want down here. Then remember, you're adding the water to it. And you're just going to start putting that in this section down here. Make it quite translucent and light. Now what I can do as well is I can take my kitchen roll. I'm going to take some of my kitchen roll, try and get the bit that hasn't got charcoal on it, and just rub that in the surface. Like so. What you can do, if you wanted the blue sky to be a little bit softer, is you can do the same. Right, so then let's take that murky green. You can darken it down a little bit more if you wanted to. Remember the acrylics, that if you add too much water to the paint, it can start flaking off the surface. So you need enough to get it so that it's thin, but not so much that it won't adhere to the surface. And then start putting down your green over here as well. Now you need to really make sure, you'll find your water is really mucky. You need to clean this because we're going to do the cream house, and if you've got green, we're going to end up with a green house. So check that your brushes are clean, check that your water is clean. Go and get clean water if it's not the case. Right, so let's get let's get that house sorted out and some basic colours laid down. I'm going to get a little bit of cadmium yellow, get some white. I'm going to add a little bit of cadmium red. It should get a bit more orangey. Now you have to judge how pale and washed out you want this to be. So it's personal preference. I'm going to go quite pale. It's very peachy. Vanilla ice cream I've got at the moment. I'm going to grab a little bit of water, stir that into my paint. And I'm going to start putting that on my lower part of my house. Like so. I'm going to get a clean bit of kitchen roll and rub that in. Get a basic tone in my house. Hopefully you should still be able to see your basic window decoration. It's got a little bit more than I would like. I'll do that again. Okay, and I'm going to add a little bit of an orangey tone. So I'm increasing my red and my yellow for that red roof. I'm going to do the same, so put my paint in that roof section. You can see here, a little bit on the chimney. The kitchen roll or your rag. Just work it out into there. Just like so. Now I'm going to go for that really strong green grass in front of it. Again, you're going to find that you'll probably need to clean your water or you'll get cross-contamination. So I'm going to take some lemon yellow. I'm going to add a little bit of the cobalt blue. And then I'm going to get that darker green that I had earlier and work that into it in the bottom. Okay, and you should end up therefore with blue sky, a bit of greenery in the background, a house with two colours if you want to go for one colour for the roof, one colour for the main body of the house, a strip of grass which is in sunlight, and then a strip of snowdrops which is slightly in shade down the bottom. Now you have to be patient and allow the whole thing to dry. Or you can give it a blast with a hairdryer, you know, if you're going to be impatient, like I probably will be in the next 2 seconds. Then we're going to come back and we're going to work up the detail. How much detail is completely up to you, and how abstract and loose you wish to keep the artwork, or how refined and far more traditional in appearance you want to take it. So let's go and have a nose. Right everyone, so it's dried out. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to work in with some acrylic still to fine up some of the detail that's darker. So to start off with, I'm going to deal with these windows. And hopefully, if you've done it thin enough, you should be able to see your windows and your doors. So let's look at these. They're kind of a dark tone of grey. I'm going to take some white and a little bit of black and build up a grey using a very fine brush. I'm going to add in a little bit of ultramarine blue. And then I'm going to patchwork these windows in using my acrylics. And I'm using my acrylics because they're going to dry, and then I come in with my oils if I'm going to come in with oils. If you're going to come in with acrylics, obviously it doesn't matter because it's going to dry really fast. So let's just get these windows put in here. I'm going to put in a little bit of a brown door, so I'm going to take some red and some yellow, using my cadmiums, make an orange, then I'm going to add in a little bit of ultramarine blue, like so. Now I'm also going to put in the brown plant. Looks like they've had ivy, it's dyed back along here. Okay, and I'm going to clean my brush. I'm going to make a lilac-y tone, so I'm using my ultramarine and my crimson. Then I'm going to grab some white, make it a little bit more paler. I'm going to use that on a little bit of shadow down the side here on my building. I'm also going to take that darker one and I'm going to put the shadow in that's being cast over here. You can see another shadow being cast over here. And again, should be 3 lots of shadow being cast by those upper windows. I'm going to throw in a shadow down the side here. Okay. And there's a little bit just on the end of the house, details along there. Now I know this all looks random and you're thinking, what on earth is Kim doing? But there is a point to this. I'm now going to just take my acrylics and I'm going to up my size of brush, something more like that size, and I'm going to do the same to the green. So I'm going to bring in some darker greens. I'm using my cadmium yellow with my ultramarine blue. And I'm going to lay down some areas where my green is particularly dark. The more ultramarine blue you add into your green mix, the darker it's going to become. Do you think about your brush marks? You are trying to represent trees and foliage. And don't worry if you over-reg it, because you're going to be painting over the top of this with the highlights. Okay. Right, then I'm going to come down and grab some brown. So I'm just cleaning my brush off. I'll take some crimson red. And I'll take some cadmium yellow. And some ultramarine blue to make quite a strong, dark, muddy brown. I'm going to increase the red quantity to make it a little bit more of a reddy brown. You might find that you need to up your yellow with that muddy brown, like so. I'm going to come in and just lay some of that brown down where I can see it here in amongst that area. So I'm putting in areas that have got extreme dark shadows, and I'm not being very neat with it. It doesn't matter so much. It's going to be sitting and poking through the upper layer. So I'm going to work on any moment. Okay, so I've laid down now some neat acrylics. Always neat acrylics are for things that are either fiddly, like the windows or the door. They're for shadows, which are where I'm going to have a darker tone and I'm going to be looking at painting in the highlights. Or they're for textures, where you've got a strong shadow in them or a dark colour. Again, you can see I'm leaving out these branches. The branches are going to go in right at the end. Don't worry about those at this moment of time. This now needs to dry, and then we're going to get into the really difficult part, which is going to require far more attention and hard work. Clean your brush and have your palette ready. For the next stage, you can be working in acrylics if you want to, or you can be working in oils. I will be moving into the oils. I prefer the colours, it's just personal preference. You won't need any solvent with them. You may need a little bit of linseed oil just to thin them down if they're a bit thick, so that it's easier to put onto your paper. You will also need brush cleaner though with the oil, traditional oils, so it's up to you. Dried on my acrylic level, and I'm going to go in with my oils. You can carry on doing it with acrylics if you want, it's completely up to you. I prefer the finish that you get with the oils. It's a little bit more glossy and the colours aren't so bright and harsh. So with the oils I prefer them, but it's just personal taste and also what you have access to. Now you can see here that I've got a palette. This is just a recycling bin, piece of plastic that some food's been kept in that's been washed out, which can be handy to work in if you don't want to buy a proper palette. I've got my lemon yellow, my cadmium yellow, my cadmium red, my crimson red, my ultramarine, my cobalt, white and black. Again, I did say on the list that if you've got other greens, go for it. You will find that there's a lot of greens here, so it will make your life easier if you've got a greater range, but I thought I would keep it really simple for the demo. Now the next thing that you need to be thinking about is the type of brush you're using and ultimately the type of mark it gives you, which results in either a traditional or a more abstract type of artwork. Traditionally, if you want to go for an impressionist feel with your work, you want to have a flat-headed brush. You want it to be quite stiff as well. So this is a stiff, flat-headed brush. You can see here, if you want to go play it safe for the smaller stuff, this is a synthetic haired, flat-headed brush. Now the synthetic hair will mean that you can smooth the brush marks out easier, especially with the oil paint, and make it look more natural. So if you want something more loose, you're looking for a flat-headed brush. Depending on how loose you want it to go, it's whether you go for synthetic or whether you go for a natural stiffer hair. If you want something that appears quite realistic in the end results, then again, synthetic hair will deliver that, and you're looking more for a pointed head brush. So you can can see here I've got a very fine one. You can get them in all range of sizes. The size that you use depends on the size of the component that you're working on. For the house, I would be quite working on a small haired brush. For these trees and plants, I'll probably be working on bigger brushes. So it depends on the size of your canvas or paper, and therefore the component that you're working on. Keep that in mind, make your own decisions. You'll find that if you pick up a brush and it's too big and you put the mark down, you find it clumsy and difficult, you need to downscale your brush. Just think about it and see how it feels and comfortable when you're brushing. How comfortable it is when you're painting, sorry. Right, so I'm going to start off with the hardest part of this picture, which is the house. Because once you get the house done, everything else is a lot easier and can be freer because it's more natural. Man-made buildings have to be accurate to make them look right. I'm going to go in with a flat-headed brush because I prefer a flat-headed brush, just personal taste, like I said. But it's quite a small one so that I can get in and get around the detail. It's nice and clean. You can see here, it's ready to go. Now to start off with, the problem with the oil paints is that you cannot be layering up on top of each other without the layer beneath cross-contaminating them when you're dealing with oils, because they take longer to dry. So you might find if you make a mistake, you need to get a tissue or a rag and you wipe it off and then start over. I'm going to take some white and a little bit of cadmium yellow to make a nice creamy shade. Maybe a very light yellow. I'm going to work on the highlights to start off with because I find it easy to work light into the dark. So I'm going to make this a little bit more orange. Like so. That looks pretty good. Now you're trying to make sure that your paint isn't coming up the ferrule because it will make the brush marks more clumsy. So wipe it off and get it just on the ends of the brush. Then start working in your areas of light. So I'll find it a lot easier just to get this brickwork in that's underneath the roof line. You're going to find that you're much slower because you're trying to be accurate. Careful how much paint you've got on there. Now I haven't got a huge amount of paint going on the paper because I want to plan to put other colours on top of it. So I'm trying to be quite gentle with the amount that's sitting on the paper. You see my brush is fairly dry. If you want the painting to be more loose, then you'll probably prefer to have a little bit more of a wetter, higher density of paint on your brush. So you're looking at something just like this. Now I'm going to just take a little bit more red, mix it in, and because here you can see there's various shades of orange that's coming through, I'm going to play around and get a few different shades of orange going into those building bricks. I'm kind of dappling it in. You're going to end up leaving some of that initial yellow and then some of it you're going to end up just going over the top of and thickening up the paint. Just play around with different yellows, tones you can generate. See here, adding a little bit of blue will give you that darker shade, which will work out well with the shadow tone down the side. needs to be a little bit darker. So what you're looking at doing with the shadows is just to soften them out and make sure that they're not too hard. They're a little bit more fuzzy edged. And you can play around with the tone that you want to generate for the shadows. Let's get that roof on. So what we're looking at constantly doing is building a basic colour. You can see here I'm making an orange, and then I'm adding in orange, the complementary colour of orange, which is blue, and that will just deaden it. Now if it starts going green, it means that you haven't got enough red in it, because you want it still to look orange but not as garish. You might find that you have to re-add the yellow back in, the red. Down, put in a few different shades of orange. It's going to look fairly bright at this stage because you haven't got any of the background colours to contrast against it, so don't worry if it is looking very bright. It'll cool down once you put the sky and the greens in. Get some of that shadowy shade in and just build up. Yeah, I think I need a little bit more of a bluey tone. shadow. You should be starting to get a little bit more of a house looking painting. Because you're getting the contrast from dark to light now. So let's just wipe that brush off. Let me get that cream. Put that cream in while I remember. Oh, my brush is still a little bit dirty. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6. I've ended up adding a little bit. Now I let that all dry a little bit and just settle down, and we'll come back to that. We're going to get some other contrasting colours to go around it. So I'm going to take my bigger brush, and this is a stiff head brush, but if you want to go for something that's a little bit softer, that's fine. And just work in a little bit of sky just to check that my colour range is correct. So if I take a bit of cobalt blue and I soften it down with quite a fair amount of white, just want to check to see how this looks. Yeah, it looks pretty good actually. I think if anything it looks like I need to go for a few stronger highlights. Work up a little bit. Don't think the building is quite as bright as it should be, so I'm going to take a little bit more of lemon yellow. Make some harsh highlights. So how's that looking? Yeah, it's starting to come along. Right, so let's work up some of the greenery around here. I'm going to take another brush, blue sky, clean that off, start making some of this highlight, some nice bright green. I use cobalt and cadmium. Okay, quite a nice bright green, more yellow, brighter green. And really utilise the brush marks, as you can see here. Really, that is very bright green. Might have to turn that down a bit. Quite yellow in there, so I'm picking up and I'm twisting my brush. So sometimes I'm using this end and sometimes I'm using the whole end of the brush, depending on the coverage that I want to get. But I'm dabbing to represent leaves. Now I could take a little bit of white and add that in, and it'll just soften it out a little bit. See there? If you're finding the colour a bit too harsh, I fancy a little bit more of a green, so you know, if I want to go a little bit darker, I'm adding that ultramarine blue, getting that darker green. Right, so you can see that I've been just layering down some loose brush marks. Now I would recommend, before you get too heavily into this, to get some of these main big branches down. You're going to need much more of a pointed brush to be able to do this type of mark. So I am just going to grab something that's it's fairly clean. Okay. And I'm going to mix up a brown. So I'm going to take some crimson, some ultramarine to make a lilac, then add a little bit of cadmium red. It should turn brown. Now if in doubt, you can use a spare bit of paper just to check how brown. That's actually probably a bit too brown. I might need to soften that down a bit, so I'm going to increase the yellow quantity. And you'll find that that goes much more to a gentler brown. Now your paint is going to be probably a little bit too thick, so I would recommend that you get a little bit of linseed oil and add just a little touch of linseed oil to that paint. And by a little bit I mean just a little bit, you don't want it too wet. I'm going to pour some out into a jam jar. I don't cross-contaminate my bottle of linseed oil. Dip my brush into the linseed oil and then add that to my paint. If you're working in acrylics, you're going to just add a little bit of water. Make sure that you thoroughly stir it in, and you'll see that the paint gets smoother and it'll be easier for you to handle. Now you need to get these in before you do too much green, because you're going to find that ultimately you won't be able to put it over the top of the green very easily unless the green's dried, and that might take some time. So I'm just going to freehand this in. So I want, see this point here to here. I know that I want to end on this third rooftop, so I'm going to put a dot there. It's going to run along the rooftop to about there, so I'm doing a dot to dot. Then it's coming up to about here, and then it's got a softer angle here. Now if you do it with the dots and you find that you actually aren't happy with your dots, so say I've changed my mind at that point, then I can get a new dot, put it in, and I can get a piece of tissue. Now my tissue is a little bit bad, but it's just dried ink, and I can wipe it off the surface, and that means I can paint over the top of it. So at this stage, because my house is wet and this is wet and I'm right-handed, it's fairly easy for me to do a dot to dot. If you're left-handed, obviously you can do it the other way around. You wouldn't build up so much bush layers here. Do look at your bush shape and make sure you get any slight curves or indentations. Then once you've got your basic line, as you can see here, I'm going to just thicken it up a little bit. Now on the picture you can see that there's a bit of green moss and there's bits sticking out, so you've got a bit here. And you can build that up if you want to. Make it a bit more naturally looking. Should end up with a branch. You can see you've got a branch there. Now let's do the next one. So I've got this hook coming down here, just quite far over to my left. This is going to come down to about this part of the building, I would say. It's in line with those windows. It's around here. Then I've got one that goes up and it arches over here, so it's going to go and that same branch hooks down. It's going to come down to here and it's going to go through that door frame, through the window, and it kind of fins off there. So let's get the main bulk of that one down. That's going to go to here. Try and do it in with smooth, swift strokes if at all possible, to each point. Be careful that you don't apply too much pressure and your brush goes too thick, because some of these you want thinner branches. And then you do the same, so you can see that there's the one that splits over from that brush. And gently work it up. just looking at the bare bones here. We're not getting this in perfect with regard to all the branches. We're getting the main branches in, just roughly plotting them over and checking that things are in the right place. Let's got that branch that comes over here. Then I've got this other branch which comes, that goes to there, that goes to there, that goes straight down. Then it splits off through a V shape around there. It comes down a little bit further to the left, then out to the left again and down. And at this point it goes off like there. Let's get this one in over here. And look at that wobbly line. If you look at the reference image, that should come over like that. And then bends down, and then we break that into the V shape, and that breaks into another V shape ultimately. And I've got this one that comes and arches down here. So we've got the basic set of those branches over there. I'm going to look at bringing these branches in just simply, actually I'm not. I'm going to wait until I put the sky in, then I'll put the branches on top, or you're going to be trying to pad the sky in around the branches, which is really difficult. So I would recommend not doing that. Let's get some sky in, because that'll be nice and easy. If I take my brush, I build up that sky tone, which remember was just cobalt blue, and a load of fluff on the end of your brush. Okay, cobalt blue and white. Let's just bring that in over here. Now I've got too much cobalt blue. Or if you want to, you can increase your cobalt blue and have a nicer sky. It's completely up to you and how close you want to stay to the photo. Remember, this is England, so the sky will change every 2 seconds if you've ever been outside trying to paint it. Try and keep your sky colour quite thin, so you can see I'm scraping it into the surface of it. That means that I'll be able to paint on top of it really easy with another colour without lifting up too much. The more paint you put on the surface, the more you're going to lift up at a later day if you're using with the oils. You're going to find that you're going to need obviously to patch in a bit of sky through the other sections of the tree. It's probably easier to do these now as well. Now you have got that blue acrylic for the first layer, so you might find that you don't have to patchwork the sky over everything if you're quite happy with that blue acrylic. That peeking through will do the job, and you can throw in sky highlights later on as you go along. I'm just throwing a bit of sky around here so I can put the green over it and make it appear a little bit more natural. And let's go in and get some more greens laid down. There's a lot of greens going on, so let's get these greens down here. You could use, if you wanted to, a fan brush, or you can stipple on, just like I'm doing. For stippling, you can pick up a few different tones of green at the same time and stipple it in. just take that blue and ease a little bit around the top because I think I've gone a little bit too high with the tree. So if I just work a little bit of the blue in the sky to cut it off, that should look fine. Like so. Then we've got various different greens. So it's all about making lots of different types of green that you can see. If you've got different greens in your oil collection, please feel free to use them. Right, let's get that nice soft highlight coming along here. So it's going to be a nice bright lemon green, a little bit of cobalt blue, a lot of lemon, and I reckon I'm going to need a little bit of white actually. Yeah. Give me that harder grey. Bit of cadmium as well. I'm working a few shades there. Just to get that in there. Nice bright glowing green. Okay, so I'm going to clean up some of my branches over here because I haven't quite got enough in. I'm going to thicken them up and add some detail just quickly. The more detail you add, the better they're going to look. It just depends on time restrictions. So you can be looking at adding in a little bit of green moss, for instance. They can look nice. You can build up some tonal changes from the light hitting them, and things like that. Right, let's just build up a few branches quickly. you can work up your branches to a much higher level than I'm doing, but it just gives you an idea of where to go with them. Once you've done that, we've got the snowdrops just to work on down here. So with the snowdrops, you need to have a nice clean brush, because you don't want any cross-contamination on your white snowdrop heads. So do wipe your brush properly. Make sure that you haven't got any cross-contamination in your paint. And then you take a little bit of white and you start dabbing it in to where your snowdrop heads are first. Now you should be working on dry acrylic layer. Think about the snowdrop's heads getting bigger to you as they come closer, and they're smaller dots as they're farther away. So consider the type of brush marks, the rhythm you're getting, the space in between them as well. Now they also go up and down, so don't keep it too crisp along this line. You will need them. Some of the heads to be very close together and to be going up and down in the rhythm. It should end up, it looks like it's snowing basically. A pebble dash of white snowing heads of flowers, as you can see here. Then you've got to go in with your finer brush. You want to mix up a nice green that represents, actually I'm going to go for cobalt and lemon yellow. I'm going to add a little bit of crimson red. Just dial it down, and then you need to start drawing in all the tiny little bits. Now again, I think you might find that it's a little bit fiddly, so you're going to want to take a little bit of your linseed oil, as you can see I just did here, stir it into your paint. And start creating the leaves and the stems. It does need to be darker to contrast against this one. So do think about the tone that you're representing and the darker shade that you need to generate. Careful not to get it all up your ferrule, because it's going to make your brush marks more clumsy. Don't overwork it, leave a bit of space because we need to come in with some highlights for both the snowdrops and the greenery. So do leave some of the acrylic spacing around it. Some of these snowdrops. And I might end up taking some white and a little bit more yellow and playing around with that tone. a little bit too grey, so let's increase the red and the yellow. A little bit of brown mud because it's sitting underneath a tree. So we're getting a few speckles of brown, which you could work up. It's completely up to you on how far you want to take this. But that gives you the bare bones starting point that you can play around with this stage. It makes it interesting. Hopefully you've learnt a lot from this. It's quite a complex amount of painting and I've done it quite quickly and quite loose. The more time and the finer the brushes you use, the more realistic it'll become. If you like it loose, then that's absolutely fine. Remember to go a little bit bigger than you'd naturally want to go with your brush size and keep your brush head flat rather than a pointed. It's completely up to you. You can up other areas as well. So for instance, with that grass along here, you could, if you wanted to push yourself a little bit further with the oils, take a little bit of linseed oil, mix it in with a yellow, like I'm doing here, and just throw that in, and that will again increase that brighter yellowy tone. Like that. Rather than using a green, use a yellow, and it'll exaggerate the contrast of the light coming in. Right, so you can see that you could build up a lot more detail with this. What you're probably going to get to at this stage is you need to allow it to dry, give it a few days. You can come back in if you wanted to tidy it up with some real fine detail, such as the head shape on the snowdrops, the windows, things like that. Then it needs to be a much drier stage for you to do that. So do give it time to settle and rest. And you can do much more finer detail using a smaller pointed synthetic head brush as well. If you like it loose and you want that more impressionist feel, then keep your head flat on your brush. Keep your brushes quite decent size. Don't get tied down to the fiddly parts. And you're summarising the most higher kind of shape that you can recognise within the form that you're painting. Hope you've really enjoyed it. You've taken a lot from this, and to go out, practice, build your knowledge of colour mixing and develop your skill level. See you next week. Bye!